Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm John Mann, Director of Education for Lakeside, and we're fortunate that Mary Knight is here today for a discussion and book signing of her work, The Power of Words. Mary will lead a conversation about the power of words, the role of empathy in reading and writing, and the rewards and challenges of the writing life. Mary is an award-winning author of Saving Wonder, What the Seahorse Told Me, The Cat's on My Lap, and Core Empathy, Literacy Learning with a Greater Purpose. Mary also coaches other writers on their book-length manuscripts and conducts author visits at schools around the country. And I would ask you to please mute your cell phone ringers if you haven't already, and help me in welcoming Mary Knight.
Thank you. I brought my cheerleading section here. I feel so comfortable here, but like, why wouldn't I? Because it's Lakeside, Ohio, right? And we're comfortable with each other here. Thank you, John, for those words that were warm and friendly and true. And thank you also for the invitation to be here. I feel very honored to be here. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about my history with Lakeside. We've been talking about how long we've all been coming here, or first-timers. But I'm here really to talk about mainly the power of words, and specifically the power of words in story. And I'm wondering how many here are readers? I mean, obviously, I'm sure you can read, but like, do you really enjoy reading? You have a book by your bedside or whatever, or never leave home without a book. That's an avid reader. And so I wonder if you've ever thought about how miraculous it is to be reading a story, and all of a sudden, you know, you feel like you're a part of that world, and you're a part of that life of those characters. And if it's a good story, and if the writer's doing her job, you're caring about those characters and wondering what's going to happen to them. And so when you care, you keep on turning the pages, right? Have you ever really thought about that miracle? That miracle that those are just printed words on a page, and something's happening in that process, right? As you're reading and taking in this story, and you're, come on in and have a seat. And you're imagining, and maybe even more than that, you're feeling what the character is feeling. And I just think that's an amazing transfer, right? And so I'm very curious, and continue to be curious, about how that happens. That's my job, actually, you know, to figure out how to engage the reader into the story so that they can, well, keep turning the page, because that's what makes it successful. So that's what we're going to look at today. And my hope is that when we leave here today, and I say we because I'm going to be changed too in the process, that when we leave here today, that we never really look or read or listen, hear a story quite the same way again, because we're going to be a little bit more aware of how that happens and the wonder and the miracle of it. Okay, that's kind of a big ask, right? But that's what I'm hoping for. So first, I'd like to talk a little bit about my life as a writer. And I thought I'd begin with my Lakeside story. So I got you beat. This little girl here is me.
Oh, okay. There's your mommy and your brother.
Isn't she adorable? And I'm arriving at Lakeside for the first time. I'm getting chills. In 1954, and yes, go ahead and do the math. I'm okay with it. That's why I put the date on there. I went, do I really want to divulge this? Sure. So yes, that's my mother. And I kind of am totally obsessed with her grip on me there. It's like a little bit of a claw, right? And I'm not sure what that's about. But anyway, and my brother, Michael, getting out of the car, and I'm assuming that my father is taking the picture. Now, this is one of the only photographs I have of myself at this age with my mother. So it's pretty darn special. And that it's at Lakeside is even more special. But this would be the last time that my family was together in this family unit. However, yes, life happens, and we'll get to that a little bit later, but I can say that I had many happy memories in the future. Like I came back again and again as a child through my childhood. So lots of good memories here at Lakeside. So I thought we'd take a closer look at this little girl's face, because when I look at that, I can see the beginnings of a writer. There's kind of this look of utter bewilderment, like, where the heck have I landed, right? Like, where am I? And that's actually, curiously, kind of a central question that a writer asks in their work, particularly in fiction. The main character is probably asking, where am I? You know, what world am I in now? You know, who am I? And why am I here? In fact, I'm reading a book now, my summer reading material. It's not literary, but it's Project Hail Mary. Some of you might have seen the movie. And the book is different. I'm not going to say it's good or, you know, better or worse or whatever, but I'm enjoying it. And the main character wakes up after 13 years in a coma, induced, and he doesn't know where he is. He doesn't know who he is, and he doesn't know why he's there. And so these are questions that often recur in the literature that we read. So anyway, this look of bewilderment, this look of wonder, I'm thinking it quickly changed into curiosity, you know, and exploring my world, which in Lakeside, and if you're a kid, you get to explore a whole lot of world here independently. I'm not so sure it was independent when I was this age, but as I grew up, it was. So anyway, this is kind of the background of how I came to be a writer. So when I was young, probably, I don't know, when I was able to first write, I wrote stories. Or I guess I should say, I imagined that I was writing a book. I don't know how far I got in the writing of it, but I love to come up with titles. And I do remember that I wrote about a talking parrot. So this was the beginning, just imagining, you know, imagining that I was writing a book. And then when my cousin Sue, who you'll hear about later, because she was big in my life here at Lakeside, my cousin Sue and I would get together. We didn't play dolls. We played newspaper reporter. We got my mom's old Royal typewriter. Any of you remember those? Clanky, clanky. And we would pretend to be newspaper reporters, and we would go out and report on all the murders in the neighborhood. And so, I'm just kidding. And then I was an avid reader. And in Cincinnati, where I lived, the summers were hot and they were humid, and I remember spending my summer on the couch with a book in front of a fan, reading, all the time reading. And then as I got into my teen years, I learned how to play the guitar, and I wrote songs, and I wrote lyrics. And eventually I went to school at Denison University near Columbus, and I majored in English with an emphasis in creative writing. And I spent a lot of that time writing poetry, which when people would ask me, you know, what am I going to do for a career? You know, I'd say, well, I'm going to be a poet. And then they would give me a look of bewilderment, like, how in the world are you going to do that? But interestingly enough, that background in poetry and in how words sound and how they fall on paper and in description and creating images has really stuck with me. And I think, is part of why I have been successful as a writer. And I bring it into my fiction writing as well. So all things work together for good here. All things work together to create this writer that I am today. And I have this here because here at Lakeside, we see so many kids. Have you noticed how many children and teens and that sort of thing? And all the Chautauqua events and all the activities that are created here for them, you know, you have no idea what those things are sparking in them, you know, so that, you know, that they become something wonderful as they grow up and what brings them to that. So that's why I included this. So in my 20s, I started my career as a professional writer. And I did lots of different kinds of writing. I wrote, and I did make a living in poetry. I wrote for newspapers and magazines, freelance. I wrote for nonprofits, for promotional kinds of marketing things. I wrote scripts for film and video productions. I also was a writer in residence in the public schools on grants from the Michigan Council for the Arts. So I brought all these things together, and I did create a career. In fact, I supported myself and my son. I was a single parent for 12 years. That's what I did in Traverse City, Michigan. So I did make a life as a writer, and I'm still writing to this day, 40 or so years later. Don't do the math. So remember when I told you back when I was a kid, I imagined creating books. And however, in the decades that ensued, to make a living, I really had to do some of those things that I told you about in order to, you know, gain an income, and didn't think I could do it writing stories or books. So I remember this one particular evening. I was reading a book of fiction from a book club I had just joined. It was a book called Ahab's Wife. Does anybody know that book? You might want to make a note of it. Somebody? Yes? Yes? Okay. So by Sina Jeter Naslund. And it's Ahab's Wife is about, she was imagining what it would be like to be the wife of Captain Ahab from the Moby Dick theme. And she wrote this amazing work of fiction. And so I'm reading it and I'm going, how does one do that? You know? Like I was completely lost in that book and that character of Ahab's wife, and like just marveling how, you know, and in that question, how does one possibly do that? I was thinking, there's no way that I can do that. I could not imagine myself writing a book. Nevertheless, the seed was planted. And I was in my 50s at the time. And I started looking for brief residency programs for MFA, Master's in Fine Arts in Writing. And I was looking here and there, nothing was fitting, and brief residency is when you go for like 10 days and then you come back and you do a whole lot of writing and you have a mentor and that sort of thing. Well, I was looking at I think it was Poet and Writers magazine, and there was an advertisement for Spalding University in Louisville, Kentucky, where I was about to move. Actually, I was moving to Lexington, but that was close by. And lo and behold, the co-director of the program was Sina Jeter Naslund. What? As I've said, well, I call it a synchronicity. I can call it that. I can call it a sign. But I went, oh, I've really got to check out this program, right? So I went and I got my MFA. And it was a process. I started at 56. I graduated at the age of 60. While I was there, I wrote a novel, a young adult novel, which is near and dear to my heart and still sits on a shelf. And I sent it out to a lot of agents and that sort of, got lots of really good rejections. You know, if you're a writer, you know that, you know, you look at the good ones, you know, they say something positive to you and encouraging, like keep it up. So I set that one on a shelf. And before I left the program, they insisted that we begin another project. And so I started writing another book, which became Saving Wonder. And I think I had maybe 30 pages into it when I graduated. So I entered a contest, writing contest. I won an honorable mention. At the time, I was incredibly disappointed. You know, I was hoping for first place. And, and here's where I say, there's no such thing as only an honorable mention. The judge was an editor for Simon & Schuster, and she was interested in reading the manuscript. Did I mention I had 40 pages of it written? And so, when you have an editor from Simon & Schuster interested in reading your manuscript, you write one, you know, like, so I just got to work. And it took some months, but I did it. And I sent it to her, and I sent it to the agent of my dreams simultaneously. And within, you know, it was a miracle. Within minutes, I got a response from that agent. And I had sent her, you know, sample pages and that sort of thing. And she says, I want to see the whole manuscript. I mean, that's just remarkable. I mean, sometimes you wait for 6 to 9 months or longer, or never hear from them. So I sent it on, and she called me. And when she said, hello, Mary, this, you know, and she gave me her name, I knew that it was a yes, because they don't call you with a no. And so amongst all the sobbing and, you know, and all that, you know, she said, you've written a great book, and I want to represent you. And I've got ideas of where I want to try to sell this. And Scholastic, the world's largest publisher of children's books, was one of them. And they saw it, and they bought it, and within 2 weeks, 3 weeks at max, we had sold the book. And there it is. This is me here, holding my book for the first time. It came, you know, and just, I'm like glorying in it. So, yeah, and it was published in 2016. So, kind of a miracle for me. I did the whole New York thing, you know, went to meet my agent and my publisher and all of that. It got good reviews, and it won some awards. Cleveland Plain Dealer gave it an A. And the awards, the Green Earth Book Award was the one that I treasure most, but I won also, the book won a Parents' Choice Award and a Sigurd Olson Nature Award. And what else? Oh, a favorite book for social studies from the Children's Book Council. So it did well. And book clubs and book fairs from Scholastic bought over 100,000 copies of it. And so that's a lot of books, right? And although those don't count in the New York Times bestseller, they don't count those, but it's okay, because they count for me. You know, I was getting that book into readers' hands. And so here's the best part about it, that publishing, is that I was then able to go into schools and talk to my readers about my book. And believe me, this gives me the greatest joy of all, because I get to listen to their insights, and I guarantee you that every single visit I have, and I've done dozens around the country and, you know, mainly the Midwest, but Poughkeepsie, New York, and I do Zoom visits with a class in Long Island. But the best part is meeting these readers, especially if they've read the book. And they offer me insights into my own writing. And I learned something. Like, the story is a living thing, and not just mine, but when it's published, it's a living thing. I say to my readers, the students that I meet, I say there are as many saving wonders as there are readers. And I say, how could that be? It's because when we read, we bring our own experience to the story, right? And we see it in our unique way through our unique lens. And so when I go to meet them, I hear their wisdom and I hear their insights and their incredible questions, which sometimes test me, but that's a good thing. That's a good thing. And incidentally, if any of you have questions along the way, please feel free to raise your hand and we can talk about whatever. So here is the beginning of Saving Wonder. So Saving Wonder is, the main theme is the power of words. The power of words specifically to influence our experience of our life and in fact to help create the world that we want to live in. And it's all about kids. You know, the main boy is 12 years old, about his agency to use his words to make a difference in his world. So here's the first paragraph. Ever since I can remember, Papa's been giving me words. Every week, a new word, beginning with A and running through the alphabet twice a year. It's a perfect system, or so Papa says. It's as if the calendar folks and the alphabet folks planned it that way. And I always stop and I ask them, why is that a perfect system? Yes, I hear it there. 26, of course, 26 letters in the alphabet and 52 weeks in a year, and they go in together perfectly. And as a matter of process in writing, I asked them, do you think I knew that before I wrote it? No. Like, as I was writing that, I went, oh my gosh, it's a perfect system. Like, I didn't think that and then write it, you know, like make that up. Anyway, writing is a process of self-discovery or a process of discovery. And if you're writing with that energy of discovery, the reader reads that energy too. They're reading that process. They've landed in that book, and they're reading it with you. He gives me the word on a Sunday, and I'm supposed to use it every day of the week. Some words I take a shine to more than others. Lackadaisical is one of my favorites. I like the way it rolls off my tongue. So this is the setup for the book. Every chapter begins with a letter, and it begins with the letter C because that's the third week in the year, and that's on Curly's birthday. So the book begins on his birthday. And every chapter has then the letter that goes and a word that accompanies that Papa has given Curly to live and to learn. So every chapter resonates in a way with that word. So words like dilly-dally, venerable, resilience, persist, irrevocable, chutzpah, which I point out also can start with a C, gullible, tipping point, juxtapose, serendipity, one of my favorite words. And so those are just some of the words that make up this life that kind of, and that directed my writing, which was kind of a wonderful thing. So it begins with the letter C. So, C. So it begins with the letter C. And if I do say so myself, the word that I chose could not be more perfect for that chapter than the one I chose, because it kind of sums up the conflict, and no, it's not conflict, the central conflict of the book. So as I tell you, I'm going to give you the synopsis of the book. I invite you to be thinking about what that C word could possibly be, okay? All right. So, Saving Wonder is about a boy, 12-year-old boy named Curly Hines, who lives with his grandfather, who he calls Papa, in the beautiful Appalachian Mountains of eastern Kentucky in a place called Wonder Gap, which is a valley, or what the eastern Kentucky people would call a holler, that's by Red Hawk Mountain. And they call Red Hawk Mountain their mountain. So a new coal boss comes into town, and his plan is to mine Red Hawk Mountain through a process called mountaintop removal mining. I'd love to hear just a show of hands, see a show of hands of those who know what I'm talking about with mountaintop removal mining. Okay, about half of you. So I'm just going to give you a little rundown on it. You know, most of the coal mining, as we were growing up, happened in, you know, underground, right? But now they have these monster machines and that sort of thing to be able to go into an area and kind of blow up the rock to get to the seams of coal, one layer at a time. So it literally does flatten out the mountain. It, of course, obviously decimates all of the life that's on that mountain, all of the green and all of that, and to get to the seams of coal. So Curly experiences it for the first time in the book. I mean, actually sees it. He's on kind of like a little tour, and this is how he describes it when he gets out of this tour bus. Eventually, the road levels out, and a vast lunar-like landscape opens up before us. Solid gray rock and hard-packed dirt as far as the eye can see. There are mountains in the distance, hinting green, but the stony wound in front of us is so wide and gaping that it looks like God himself swiped away the mountaintop with one mighty claw. If he had one, that is, and I'm not saying he does. So, there's a bit of the conflict. Their Red Hawk Mountain is threatened to be mined, and Curly's task is to use the words that his papa has given him to find the way to inspire others, his friends in the greater community, to find a way to save their mountain. Now, just a little bit of backstory. You know, a lot of research goes into books, even fiction books. And I had to research this. I mean, I visited a mining site. In fact, that's what kind of got me going on the book. Didn't know how to write about it. I was devastated when I saw that. And so I did research for a few years before I actually began to write. But I asked, I was about a third of the way through the book, unbelievably actually, and I interviewed somebody in the mining permit office, and I said, what would save a mountain from mountaintop removal mining? A little late to be asking, but, and he said, basically nothing, because those companies are really powerful. You know, they're powerful in the community and that sort of thing. And I called him back and I said, I don't need to know what is probable, but can you tell me what might be possible to save the mountain? And he said, well, you know, if they found like petroglyphs or an ancient burial site on that area, that would help. But he said, but it wouldn't just be 2 or 3 people. I mean, he said, you would need to get a lot of people behind that in order to save the mountain. And I said, okay, I've got the rest of my book now. I know what I'm going to do. So that was Curly's task, to find the way, to use his words to save the mountain from, I'm imagining this might be their house, you know, looking like that. Also at stake is a beautiful, like 400-year-old sycamore tree, which forms the cover of the book there, where the kids, Curly and his best friend Jules, meet up since they were babies, and they meet up there to just, you know, hang out, talk, visit, meditate. They didn't call it meditation, but just to hang out and take in the beauty of the mountain. So that's at stake because the tree would be gone. and this magnificent elk who lives on the mountain. So there are consequences, you know. And that's kind of what's happening. So we get back to the letter C. And no, C doesn't stand for coal either. But Curly's dilemma is this. He lost his father, actually some of his family, to coal mining accidents, and the old coal company at the time made a deal with Papa that to keep it out of the courts, they settled and they would give him a stipend every month to live on, as long as they didn't speak out against the coal company. So the new coal boss moves in and he graciously, you know, keeps that promise. But if they speak out against the mining, they lose their stipend, and they're going to have to move out of there. If they don't do it, they lose their mountain, right? So it's a real dilemma. So does anybody know the C word? Yes! Okay. It's conundrum. I love that word, incidentally, and I'd love to be able to get it in there, especially as the first word. An intricate and difficult problem, seemingly unanswerable. It's kind of like a puzzle. And indeed, living in Kentucky, I know very well that coal mining is a conundrum in Kentucky because it offers, you know, good paying jobs, especially mountaintop removal mining, fewer jobs than they used to have, but they're better paying. And it keeps the lights on, which is a favorite thing for the coal companies to say. And, you know, so it's good for economy, I guess. It also, consequently, because of the devastation to the environment, those minerals, when they're when the mountain's blown up, all those toxic minerals get into the water system and flow down the mountain. And, you know, people drink it and cook with it and all that. And incidence of cancer are a lot higher in that area. So there are consequences. So it's a conundrum. It's a conundrum. So interestingly, one of my first author visits was near coal mining country. And it was at a middle grade library. And the librarian there told me, my father has been a coal miner all his life, still is. Only now he works in electrical, so he gets to stand up in the mine instead of leaning over. He's very aware of the environmental impact of mining. All of them are. But what's he going to do? It's his living. And I said to her, you mean he's living the conundrum? And she said, yes, that's right. He's living the conundrum. The same librarian said a lot, and when she introduced me to the kids, she said, a lot has been written about the people of Appalachia, some of it not very kind, but Ms. Knight writes about us with respect. And let me tell you, that is one of the best compliments I could get, because that was intentional. That was intentional. In fact, let me tell you a little story. When I was I think I was probably in 3rd grade, a boy gets on my school bus. He's from Appalachia. He's moved up to Cincinnati, I guess, for his father to get a good job. And the kids started bullying him, you know, calling him all kinds of names, calling him hillbilly, talking about, why are you wearing shoes? I thought, you know, you just went around in bare feet and all those, you know, trivial things. And this boy was so embarrassed, and I felt so anxious for him. But I was a shy little girl, and I didn't speak up, you know, because I didn't know what to do. I couldn't imagine standing up to those bullies. And so this book was written and published and out, and I was going to author visits, and I just suddenly remembered this, and I thought, oh my gosh, I think this played an important part in my writing this book because I wanted to write a story that, where the people in Appalachia would be respected, just respected. So I didn't speak then, but I used my voice later. So one of the favorite questions people ask is, what inspired your story? And this is my grandfather. We called him Other Daddy. And he was what we call a self-made man. He literally believed in the power of words to help create his life. He read the dictionary. I think he graduated from 8th grade, but if he was interested in something, he'd explore it, he'd research it, he'd read books, and he became very successful in his work. And at the dinner table every night, he would give his daughters, my mom is the second one from the top, he would give his daughters a word to learn and to use that evening in conversation. And so the idea of Papa giving Curly a word every week came directly from my grandfather and kind of fashioned the character of Papa. You could say that the power of words and this idea that words do have power, I inherited, right? It's my legacy. In fact, it's become core to my life. So here we get to what gives words the power, and specifically as a writer, what gives words the power to inspire readers to care? Well, I have two versions. I have the geeky science version, and I have what I call a God version. And I happen to believe that both are true. So we're going to start with the geeky science version of what gives words their power, which incidentally, the power to care is a big deal. Like I've mentioned, if readers don't care, they don't turn the page. They put the book down. How many of you have read first chapter, second chapter, I don't care. Put it down, I know you. You're a hard customer, let me tell you. Yeah. If you don't care, why do it? So this is critical to a writer. So the geeky version is about this thing called empathy. Now, what is empathy? Anybody want to say what empathy is? You care about what other people are feeling. It's part of it, yeah. You step into a character's shoes. You see the world through their eyes and imagine what a character feels. In the case of the world, we're doing this with other people, right? We're imagining what their life might be like, what they might be feeling, to the point where we might even feel it ourselves. And there is a scientific reason that happens. And it's called mirror neurons. Okay, show of hands, how many of you have heard of mirror neurons before? Okay, fewer. Goody, I get to tell you about them. So there are these cells in our brain, and this is in theory. There are these cells that fire up when we watch somebody do an action, for instance, and we actually imagine or feel ourselves doing that same action. Let me give you an example. It's easier. So have you ever seen somebody hit their thumb with a hammer or something like that, maybe stub their toe or whatever? What happens when that happens? What happens to you when you see this?
I picture myself doing it.
You what?
You can feel what they feel.
You can feel what they feel. My fingers might even kind of tingle, right? Isn't that interesting? It's just such a correlation there. And so these mirror neurons are actually working when you're reading. What's even more amazing, okay, so sensory details are a basic tool in the writer's toolbox, And, the five senses, anytime you write with them, you are connecting to those mirror neurons in the reader's mind. And what they've recently found in just the last 5 years is that when you read, say, a passage that describes a taste, for instance, like pizza or something, those neurons light up in that section of the brain that covers taste as if you were experiencing it yourself. Don't you think, am I the only one who thinks that's amazing? It is amazing. That's the magic of reading, of words. Crazy. So here's some examples from Saving Wonder. Papa pulls my birthday meatloaf and a tray of biscuits out of the oven, and the smell just about knocks me over. Well, smell's just already in there. But do you know the smell of biscuits coming out of the oven? Do you know the smell, for instance, of hot donuts in the morning at Lakeside, Ohio? Come on. I mean, I have that memory from 50 years ago. 60 years, you reminded me, I know. Like I said, don't do the math. The book has a brown leather cover, but no title, and the pages are blank. Okay, this is sight, but I think it kind of has touch to it too, don't you? Yeah, with that leather cover. Thwack, love onomatopoeia. Okay, you knuckleheads, listen up. So we hear that sound. And in our brains, those cells in that section that deals with sound are lighting up. Does it ever feel lonely, I ask, peeling a piece of pepperoni off the top of my pizza and popping it in my mouth? Taste? There's also some feeling in there, and we'll get to that later. I hold the flat stick in the palm of my hand and rub my thumb up and down its silky smooth surface, and that, of course, is touch. So that's a big tool that writers use to engage your reader empathy. You're coming into that experience of the novel. So, sensory details, fire up those neurons. You're empathizing, you're engaging, it's pulling you into the story, and you're ready to ride with it. Another tool is what I call inside view, or an interior reflection. You're getting to know what's happening in the thoughts of the character and in the heart of the character. And this is an example. Now I'm the broody one. I brood about dead lakes, topless mountains, and some coal boss's son kissing my best friend. Every stinking one of them irrevocable. There's no turning back. What's he feeling here? How would you name that feeling? Hopeless. What else? Desolation. Angry. Disgust. How about jealous? Right? Do you see any of those words in that paragraph? No. Because in order, if you're writing well, you're using, words and nouns, that's enough. You don't have to just name it, like lonely or whatever. Because that really doesn't fire up the neurons, to tell you the truth. But this kind of thing does. So here's how Curly talks about his mountain when he's talking to the coal boss, actually. They're having a conversation. And I call it a civil conversation, which is kind of unusual in these days, right? But I use it as an example in my workshops with kids, that you can have a civil conversation about this. And this is what Curly says about his mountain. Red Hawk Mountain means the world to me. It is my world. It's all I've ever known from the time I was knee-high to a rooster. I'm sure I've walked every inch of it. I know it like the back of my hand. All my memories of my daddy and ma and little Zeb are rooted there with the trees. I wake up to that mountain. I go to sleep to that mountain. Some days I might not think about it or even appreciate it, but it's always there, kind of like God. You take that mountain away from me, and Papa, and you might as well take our house too. The mountain is our home. So kind of what's interesting about his argument, it doesn't include the effects on the environment, the cause of cancer and all of that sort of thing. He's talking about, he's talking about wonder. What instills wonder and awe and beauty in his life? So here's the deal. Empathy, which is my superpower, and all the writer's tools, and these are just two of them that evoke it. What that empathy does is it actually sets the reader kind of in like a roller coaster car. That's the main character, the protagonist. Kind of sets you into that life at the beginning if the writer's doing their job. And the reader then rides the ups and downs of that character's life. And empathy is the power, the fuel of the words that actually causes that to happen, to engage you in the story. So here's the God version. Are you ready for like a Sunday school lesson? Because I don't get to do this in the public schools, right? So, no, don't look. I was going to ask. This is a trivia question. What are the first 4 words of the Bible? In the beginning, God. Yay. So, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And I just happen to think that's a fantastic first paragraph. It establishes the protagonist, God. It sets the setting and the tone, right? And the tension, that hovering over the waters, you wonder what's going to happen. And then the next thing. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. This is kind of simple, but how does God create in this story? Through his words. And then later, God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. So if we are made in the image and likeness of God, how do we create? Lots of different ways. But I'm guessing that words are powerful, right? They're our divine inheritance. And as writers, we use that inheritance to write stories that inspire the reader to laugh or to cry, to be happy or to feel sad, to feel surprise, or wonder, or to be thoughtful, to think about things, or, to be shocked, or maybe even afraid. That's powerful stuff that we do, and that's our legacy. So how does a writer know when she's been successful? This is a question I ask myself a lot sometimes. Is it when the book becomes a movie? Is it when, the writer gets a lot of money, sells a lot of books? Well, we define what's success, right? I tend to adjust my definition, to feel positive about my life. But this wasn't hard to adjust to. I think it's when I help my readers feel something, to experience something. And I get feedback on that, both in my author visits, and sometimes people write me. And this is from a mother. My name is Brooke Ray, and I'm very proud to say that I'm from Harlan, Kentucky, and a coal miner's daughter. I have an 11-year-old daughter who is currently reading Saving Wonder. She loves it and cannot put it down. That's a big deal. I wanted you to know what she said. I could feel way down, deep down, how Curly felt. It gave me chills all the way down to my bones. I have never had that happen before, Mama. We moved from these beautiful mountains and currently live in Athens, Georgia. I love that she is so connected to your book, and I feel like a little piece of my mountain heart is being given to her with every chapter she reads. Wow. Okay, that's my success. Right there. And it's a success also. I feel successful when my readers, like when I meet them in schools and they say, well, what happens to Curly? You know, what happens to Jules? They're imagining that they're living these lives beyond the pages, right? And they sometimes ask, do they get married? I won't tell them. Okay, so again, with my journey as a writer, I co-authored a book called Core Empathy, Literacy, Instruction with a Greater Purpose. That was because I was just so jazzed about empathy, and I wondered, you know, how it could be brought into the school system. As it turns out, this is anecdotal, but we did lots of case studies, and it seemed to deepen the reading and writing skills when they read and wrote with this empathy in mind. And it cultivated empathy in the classroom. Doesn't get much better than that. And then I wrote this simultaneously to working on the empathy book. I wrote my second novel, What the Seahorse Told Me. And it too won a Green Earth Book Award that I'm very proud of. This book is about this young girl, 11 years old, Sophie Kai Bender, who has Hawaiian ancestry, and she has inherited an empathic skill, a special gift, but she doesn't think of it as a gift, but a skill to sense and kind of read what an animal is thinking or feeling. And so when she's invited to, with a mysterious invitation to a camp in Hawaii, so when you read the book, you get to spend a lot of time in Hawaii, which is really cool. She is going to figure out how to use her gift to help save some sea turtle eggs from the black market. So there are thugs who are after these eggs. It's true, it happens, to sell to the black market. And so she and her friends, who also have empathic skills of their own, find out about this plot, and they try to save those eggs. So adventure ensues, and they, in fact, are helped by this gecko named Slytherin, and also there's a shark involved. And my writing partner insisted that I put a shark in there, you know, and so I did. So, and it's cool. I don't know. So, but again, the power of words is another thing, is a theme that comes into this book. In this case, Hawaiian words, and in particular, the word aloha, which is an amazing word. Actually, I was thinking, you know, Lakeside is a community of aloha. Yeah, isn't it? I mean, so it means hello and goodbye, which I think is amazing in itself for one word, but also has definitions of love and compassion and mercy, forgiveness and kindness. It holds all of that. Sophie makes a comment. She's from Seattle, and she says, they have as many definitions of aloha as we do for rain in Seattle. So here I'm coming back around to my Lakeside story. So the emotional arc of the story, which is a subplot, is about Sophie and her family have experienced the loss of a baby child. And they're kind of stuck in this grief. And I was able to write with empathy because my own family had experienced something similar. They'd lost a child a year and a half before I was born. So I was born into this grieving family. And so I was finally ready to write this story. And a writer does this. You use the experience. You use, you know, all the feels that you've had in your life, you put into your work. And so I use my empathy that I now have for my mother, my father, my brother Michael, and myself. And I was determined to write a story of a family who found the way to recover and to heal from that enormous crushing grief. And I guarantee you, it has a happy ending. So that's the power that I work with. You know, I can write stories that I'm drawing from my own experiences. You know, the empathy that I feel for others as I've watched them live and love and all that. And I can write a story that maybe is even a little better than what had actually happened. Or maybe what's possible, right? Because that kind of healing that I write about is possible. And Sophie kind of shows you the way. In fact, Sophie's journey is really about finding the way to live aloha in her life, and that means finding love and forgiveness also for herself as well as for others. So, getting back to Lakeside. So this is not just an end of a family system. I mean, the family went on, it just was configured differently, let's say. But it was also the beginning. It was the beginning of many happy experiences, happy stories as a child. I mean, we came back here with my mom and my aunts and my uncles and my cousins. I mean, we walk around here, you know, this week, and I just see all of them here, you know? And it had lots of happy memories. Like, I remember playing in the sand. We watch those kids playing now. I remember the feeling of that wet sand on my feet. I remember how I couldn't get the sand out between my toes. It seemed to stick forever. I remember the joy of making a castle and the disappointment of when it dissolved into the ground. I remember shuffleboard. I remember the sounds, the whoosh of that puck going down the court, and I remember the clink of, you know, when you knock somebody off the court. And I remember fishing with my uncles. We went out on a boat. I remember one time we caught, I think it was 100 perch. I mean, does that happen now? I don't know, maybe there's a limit. But I remember that. I remember the hot sun on my back and the sunburn afterwards. I remember the pier. I remember walking up and down the pier, particularly in the evening. And weird memories come back. Like, I remember the song, and this really dates me, that she wore an itsy bitsy teeny weeny yellow polka dot bikini. Well, that was like the song of that year. And I remember that on the pier, you'd always hear that, you know, on a transistor radio. And I remember one day particularly where it was storming and the waves were leaping over the pier. And these days they wouldn't let you on the pier, but my cousin Sue, who I mentioned earlier, and she was 3 years older, so I always did what she would do. We ran down the pier in between the waves and squealing at the top of our lungs. And I honestly don't remember where our parents were. I mean, they just weren't there. But we survived, obviously. And I remember the cottages that we stayed in. I particularly remember the smell of the cottages, which I loved, but our parents would call musty, right? But I loved that smell. I loved the screened-in porches. I remember begging our parents to let us sleep outside on the porch. And then there were the porch swings, and I remember this one particular porch swing incident where my cousin Sue, who's 3 years older, was pushing me and my younger cousins on the swing, and we were giggling and laughing, and we were going higher and higher, and I felt the breeze, you know, blowing in my hair, all that, until Sue gave one final push, and the whole thing turned over, and there was one screaming mess of kids. Obviously, this is not us, but you get the gist or the spirit of it. You know, we were just a mess of crying. That's when the mother showed up. And I remember a goose egg on my forehead, and Sue got into a whole lot of trouble. And we talk about it to this day and laugh. So, memories. But what I remember most is riding my bike all over the place, and nobody knew where I was. I just had that independence because I felt safe, right? And there was such freedom in that. Oh, and the donuts, then and now. Then the bakery was where all those restaurants are, and the smoothies and all of that. But yeah, the smell of fresh baked donuts would just waft through town, you know, and us kids were, you know, given the job of going to get them. And I'm sure one or two of them, you know, didn't get back to the house. And then about 50 years later, not having visited Lakeside in that time, Jonathan and I came up to see the solstice. And the eclipse, thank you. The eclipse. And it was incredible. Was anybody here for that? Yes, yeah, it was an incredible experience. And I remembered Lakeside, you know, I remembered that this is the place where you learn stuff, you know, where people come to be curious. And nothing had changed in that way. You know, I ran into a fella in the elevator who apparently was in a Lakeside important guy. He looked important, and I told him, I said I'd been here 50 plus years ago. And he said, well, has it changed? And you could tell, like, he wanted me to say, oh, yeah, it's really changed and been updated and all that. And I said, no. And he looked at me and like, what? And I said, well, yeah, I mean, it's changed and it's nice, you know, it's taken care of. But I said, the spirit of it hasn't changed. And I'm here to tell you, it hasn't changed. It's the same feeling and the same people, different names, but people who were curious, you know, and who were kind and want to teach each other. This is a little girl who was showing us that, and with the eclipse, that it would shine through and put those holes on that paper. And she was taking this colander around and showing anybody who would listen. I know. And, you know, and in the Egler room at the Fountain Inn was all this information about what was going on. And we went, this is our place, you know? We have to come back. And so that's why I'm here. I'm back. I'm back to bring some joy of my life here. You know, I get to hear about yours. You know, that's what we do here. And I guarantee you that empathy is running throughout every encounter that we make as we share our stories, the stories of our lives. So I just had to show you this picture. I just thought this was amazing. I took this picture 2 nights ago. That was the sunset, and it just happened to occur on our wedding anniversary. Yeah. So that's what I've got. If anybody wants questions, whatever, yeah, you can applaud. Thank you. Thank you. Questions about writing, questions about my life as a writer, you know. This is when kids ask, how much money do you make? Yeah. Yes? Yes. Well, they approach me with usually a full-length manuscript, but it usually needs work. And so we work together on that, and some of it involves teaching and editing, you know, and giving comments. And I'm very much a believer that I want to keep the integrity of their story, you know, like they're the author. You know, I'm just there to help and to coach them along. But it looks like me reading what they're doing and making comments, and, you know, and it goes back and forth. And then usually there's another round. I mean, any real good, ready for publication novel is going to need, rounds of revision. It takes a lot of work. I mean, I'm always telling the people that I'm mentoring, this is really hard. I mean, it's hard, and it takes a long time, But if you're having joy, if you're feeling the joy of the process, then, I mean, I asked myself before I got an agent for Saving Wonder, I had to talk with God, and I said, what happens if this doesn't go anywhere? And so, as usual, God asked me a question back, which was, well, then what would you do? And I said, I'd still write, So you've got to love what you're doing, because there's no guarantee of publication, but that's what mentoring looks like. And if you're interested anymore, we can, talk afterwards, whatever, minor. Yes?
Are you working on any writing right now?
I am, and it's poetry. So I'm getting back to that poetry. And I'm just having such a good time. And I'm not worrying about getting it published, which is a relief. But Lexington right now calls June their poetry month. And there is, we're on a, platform, I guess, of like over 300 poets. And we submit a poem a day or thereabouts. I think I've written maybe 18 or 19. The last 5 have been about Lakeside. And I'm just having a blast. And it's a great community. We offer encouragement to each other and that sort of thing. So, and I'm also have some thoughts of a memoir. So we'll see what happens. But I'm writing for the pleasure of it. And I love getting back to poetry because it's getting back to shaping, shaping words and images and sounds and that kind of thing, yes.
So I'm just curious what tips you might have for encouraging elementary age kids to write. So like going, later, like third, fourth, fifth grade.
Yeah, have fun at it. And, my encouragement looks like, I don't know if teachers like it or not, but don't worry about punctuation and whatever. It's like go for it, just play. It's that age particularly is just about play and finding the joy in it, because you're not going to do something that you're not feeling joy. You're just not. And so it's really encouraging and cultivating the joy of that process. And there are all different kinds of ways to do that. I loved my work in the schools. I was a writer in residence in Suttons Bay, Michigan, for about 6 years, and I got the same kids. Oh my gosh, what a treat! All the way through those 6 years. So when I walked into a room, bam, they knew what they were doing. They were ready, and and it's exciting. There are lots of different things that you can do. Joining words with drawing and painting and all kinds of fun. But that's how I would encourage to play. To just play. And read. Right? Yeah. So, anybody else? Yes?
I've heard people say that you need to write every day and a certain amount of hours every day.
Yeah.
Something. How do you feel about that?
I'm laughing. I went for a few years not writing much because of things going on in my life, But I will say that this poem a day thing, there's something to it, because I'm thinking like a poet like all the time. Like I'm looking for the poem of the day when I'm walking around. We encountered a little baby bird that had fallen out of a nest and happened to land on the number 16 mini golf green, and it was just kind of hunkered down, and I got some gloves and I moved it, and it was injured. I mean, it was not gonna last. And I asked the person, what should I do? And she said, well, just let nature take its course. But I moved it and I put it aside into some rough, where I hope nobody would walk, and that became a poem, So to answer your question, it does help to even meet the page, even for 5 minutes, because it keeps that energy and that. But more than that, you're looking at your world. It keeps you open to what's the next thing that I want to express. And I wrote about that bird, but I was writing about, you know, loss, sadness, things that I couldn't. The title of it was The Best I Could Do. The best I could do with that bird was to move it to a safer place, but I knew it was on its way out. So, you know, so yeah, I'd say I'm not one who really likes discipline, or regimen, or, you know, that kind of, but I would say, yeah, writing every day is probably a good idea. But you better enjoy it.
When you start a project, before you start writing, do you have it pretty well planned out?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, yeah. So they call that, you're either a plotter or a pantser. Pantser meaning you're writing by the seat of your pants. And the plotter, you know, has an outline. He's a plotter. I'm both, you know, so, well, like I said with Saving Wonder, you know, I was third way through and didn't know how I was going to end, and that's dangerous. I mean, so, but it was magical too, because it just kind of wrote itself. The structure I created with a word a week and as a word a chapter, that really helped me as a writer kind of narrow down the field, you know, and I, you know, so to answer your question, I do both. I'll get into it and then I go, oh, wait a minute, I need to be thinking about how I'm organizing this, you know, how this is going to go. So I go kind of back and forth. Yeah, you want to speak to that?
Well, no, I have a question for you.
Okay, well, wait a second. He had a follow-up, and then I'll get to you, sir. Okay. No, that's okay. No, he's my husband. It's okay.
Constantly revise it as you're working on it, or do you finish it?
Oh boy, is that a question? I am one of those who I tend to revise as I go. Like I'll write a chapter and I'll just keep on looking at it. And there are people who say you should go on, you know, just keep going, write that first draft, you know. And I'm like, no, what's fun about that? The fun for me is making that writing shine. So that's what I do. I mean, everybody's different, but I revise as I go, and I read aloud. I'll read it to myself to hear the words. I like to be able to taste the words, if that makes any sense. You know, I like to hear them. And so, thank you for that question. Are you a writer?
I try to be, but
Well, you are. I tell you that. You get to be a writer. Yeah, you're a writer if you write. I mean, we just absolutely, you know, in this culture, you know, you're only a writer if you're published or whatever. No! You know, we all write. Yeah, we can all write. Anyway, you're a writer. Especially asking questions like that. Those are writerly questions. Yeah.
Speaking of hearing your words aloud, my wife and I take long car trips sometimes, and I was wondering if any of your books will be available as audiobooks.
Okay, this is why I bring him. So we just got through recording a narration of what the seahorse told me. And I recorded it. And it was such a pleasure because I knew the book. I mean, I really knew the book, so that when I'm reading it, like, I know what I had in mind for, you know, how it should be expressed and read aloud. So we did that, and it's about to be available on Audible, but other platforms as well. We're working on it. There are like, dozens of other platforms that you can. How many of you listen to audiobooks? Raise your hand. I'm very curious about this. Okay, it's a thing, and I get it. So we unfortunately don't have the link to give you now, but if you look on Amazon, you'll find it. By the end of July. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
How long are you going to be around here?
Until Saturday morning. So,
Till Saturday morning?
yes.
Do you have any more classes or anything going on?
No, I guess this is a lead-in though. So we were talking last night, because we want to come back. And we were talking last night about doing actually kind of a writer workshop kind of a thing. You like that idea?
Oh, I love it.
Okay.
What do you think? Do you love it? Raise your hand.
Okay, so a few. Okay, that's all we need. A little bit of encouragement. But thinking about, we were thinking about writing your story. Like, writing your stories. You know, how just even vignettes of memories you have that you can pass down to your family. You know, which are they're so rich here at Lakeside. We live in Lexington, Kentucky. Yeah, like we can't, it's not a hop, skip, and a jump, but yeah. But, I mean, it's not bad. You write?
Yeah, I wrote poetry.
Oh.
I wrote a book about my children when they were little.
Oh,
Well, it was their adventures. with
Yeah.
a Sad dragon.
Oh, okay, neat. Yeah, so we're thinking about doing it, and we wanted to ask people what they thought, you know, because we don't know, you know, what people like here, but we know you like people. Yes? Oh, I've got a children's book for grandparents and great-grandparents that are here. Yes, here it is. The cat's on my lap. Aw. So we were hanging out, Jonathan and I, and we're like, oh, it would be really fun to work on something together. And we're like, well, I've always wanted to do a picture book. And Jonathan said, well, you know, what story would we use? And I said, well, I happen to have one that I wrote when I was, you know, doing my master's degree. And so I pulled it out and I gave it to him, and he laughed and liked it. And he is an illustrator and a graphic artist. And so he did the pictures, and I did the words, and I know. And it's about how a cat changes the family's life when it comes in, how our pets change our lives, right? So it's kind of fun. So this too is available on Amazon, right? And also at this table. Oh, and Fine Print has copies, and also they have What the Seahorse Told Me, and you can buy them from us. We have the way to do that.
Only place you can get Saving Wonder.
The only place you can get Saving Wonder, because it's out of print to the basic. You can get it, though. I mean, you know how to do that. You go on Amazon, and they show you where you can get other buyers and that sort of thing. But they're still selling to schools. So it's a very popular book still with classrooms. You know, teachers buy it for their classroom. So. Oh, yes, my quilt. Did you guys notice the quilt? Isn't that incredible? So, you know, I told you that publishing Saving Wonder was a dream come true, right? And like, I milked it for all that it was worth. And I have a friend who is a quilter. And she said, well, I'll quilt you the cover. And so she quilted this for me. I mean, I paid for it, you know, dearly, and it was worth every penny of it. I commissioned it. That's the word. That's the word. I commissioned this quilt. And I don't bring it with me often, because I don't bring it to schools anymore, but I felt safe bringing it here. So wanted to just share it with you. Anybody here quilters? Ah, okay. Pretty good, huh? Yeah. Yeah.
Could I get her contact information?
Sure.
Could I have your permission to order one of those?
Well, she didn't make copies. I mean, this isn't an original. She didn't make copies of it. I mean, if you commit, I said she did not.
No. Could I pay her to quilt to do exactly?
Okay. Well, I'll give you her information.
Okay, great.
Yep.
That's great. I
Yep.
love that.
Well, we even talked about how that would be a cool thing for her to do, like literary quilts, you know, for writers, because believe me, it's hard to get published. And when you do, you want to commemorate it, right? Well, how better than this, you know? I know, it's really special. It costs some money, I'll warn you. Yes, sir.
You know, you
Yes.
There's a lot of Facebook reels about Gen X's and boomers
Yeah.
that drink out of a hose,
Yes.
Yes.
hot slides, and all kinds
Yes.
of stuff. And I don't know if that's got any potential.
Believe me, you have spoken to something that I feel like I live. I have a T-shirt. He got it for me because he knows me. That says, what did you tell me? What's it about the unsupervised thing?
Don't mind me or something
Yeah,
like that?
don't mind me. I grew up unsupervised. You know, like it was just nobody was there. but that's why I'm a writer, because I learned how to create my worlds. You know. And I'm still creating them, but I'm creating with words. We got to be out of here in 10 minutes. So I want to give you time to buy something if you'd like. If not, that's fine. I loved you guys. You were great. Thank you.